Hey everyone, today I'm going to be covering a Daybreak deck list. So everything I've covered mostly on the channel until now has only been the base set as well as Frostfall. And this is based off of a previous list that did exist. This was originally called Fruit Combo. The biggest thing was it played Drataya. Drataya says that every time you play Ambrosia, you can draw 2 cards, and this is any player. So if your opponent for some reason played an Ambrosia while the Drataya was out, you would also draw 2. It played Ambrosia, and the idea was you would play the Drataya and then play a bunch of Ambrosias, draw a bunch of cards, and then you would try to win the game from there. The first upgrade came with Frostfall, which introduced Ambrosia Cornucopia, which has the same headline, so it basically works with Drataya. So that gave you 3 extra copies of Ambrosia in your deck. Obviously, this is a different card, but being able to run 3 and 3 of this means that you now have access to chain so many Ambrosias, so you can play the OG Ambrosia and then draw into this new Ambrosia, play this Ambrosia, draw into the old Ambrosia, play the old Ambrosia. You get the idea, right? So and then not only that, but also Cornucopia also draws a card when you play it. So the deck would basically play for that. It would play Drataya, and then it would just draw like 20 cards. That's an exaggeration, but you would draw a bunch of your deck. The biggest problem is the deck, even if it got lucky and was able to draw that, because it wasn't able to draw it all the time, was fairly inconsistent. It had a problem winning after that, because you would draw a bunch of cards, but that doesn't really equal a win condition. So I played things like Lotagon, which was a pretty good Ascension that also worked with Ambrosia, but it still is just a little too clunky. It doesn't really have like a really deterministic, powerful pop-off that just locks the game out. So what happened in Daybreak is we got a very interesting card. So we got Vesuvatuga. So Vesuvatuga cares about a card called Eruption. Eruption is a double red invoke, and you play it, and if your opponent doesn't have any fire enchanting spirits, they have to expend 3. If they have fire enchanting spirits, it's 1, so it's way worse. So this is also meta dependent, but this card is very good. And it was actually played in a version of a red-blue water stall list that was called Krakatuga Burn. But the more important thing is that it's in green, which means that you can play a fruit deck that then gets to play into Vesuvatuga, and then you've drawn so many cards, you're very likely to have a bunch of eruptions. You can play all the eruptions off, and you're dealing all the way up to 9 damage to your opponent just based off eruptions. And then you're going to heal all that back in the deck. How do we fill out the rest of the deck, right? Well, we have some pretty good new pickups, right? Voltuga is a new card from Daybreak. This is a pretty decent defense stat line at 4. It's like okay. Its attack stat is like also like kind of serviceable. If you play something like Tsunami, this would probably pressure most things on the table, right? Anything up to a 2 defense. So you're gonna clear things like Jolton, Elichick. So it's not bad, right? This would take out something like Viserys if you put Viserys either into defense off of Tsunami, or when Viserys plays a new copy in, you can attack that one. So it's okay, right? It's just like barely kind of mid enough to be okay in both circumstances. But what's more important about this is when you cast it, you can go pay 1, and then you get to go tutor for your deck, either in your deck or in your underworld for Eruption. So that also means that once you dump the 3 copies, if you play Voltugas, you can just retrain the Eruptions. So if we include the Voltugas as well as the 3 copies of Eruption, we're talking 6 copies of Eruption, which is going to be 18 spirits dealt. That's nuts, right? We could include things like Pandison to recur it even further, but that honestly kind of feels like overkill in my opinion. I think the biggest question is whether or not you want something like Rise from the Ashes in this deck. I really don't know the answer to that. Maybe Rise from the Ashes is correct here to let you basically cheat out a few extra summons, especially with things like Voltuga, because you will have the spirits to do it, right? Rise from the Ashes is very expensive, but if you're healing so much back, maybe it's okay. And then for the rest of the deck, we're trying to smooth out that play experience of getting into the Drataya combo, and then we're also playing some good stat line stuff. This is just going to let us play a normal game until we find the Drataya. Some of the fruit lists, in my opinion, I think are a little too passive. They'll play things like Clovey and basically draw a bunch of cards but not really pressure the board at all, and that sometimes just makes it a little bit too easy for your opponent to establish a board presence that even post-combo you can't really answer very well. So we have Viserys in 3 copies. We have Ash Rabbit, which is a pretty cool new addition, right? So this is going to give us a 5 stat line in defense. We don't need to play Ash Rabbit. And we can even regain eruptions, right? So if we were to play 3 eruptions and then play Ash Rabbit and then target 3 eruptions, We can get all the way up to what, 9 copies of Eruption, so 27 spirit damage, if that math is correct. So really good for a lot of different reasons, right? We can also recur some spirits early game. We can recur some of our counter runes, even like an earthquake, something like that. Good stuff. 2 copies of Lavalith because we're naturally in red. Really powerful card. Don't really need to explain too much about this. And then we have our Dratayas, obviously. And then we have Rummagem. Rummagem is just going to add a little bit of consistency. So this is copies 4 and 5 of your Drataya, but it also can be your Viserys or your Boltuga. So it's like a good flexibility there. But the card is also pretty terrible on stat lines, so I don't really want 3 of it. I'd rather have 2, especially when you're competing with your summon. And then for the rest of the deck here, the biggest exclusion is Shields. I really don't know what to do with Shields. I think Chains is a little bit better for the deck because if your opponent like Gorgons or Poison Tips your Drataya on the combo turn, I basically don't do anything. So I think I'd rather have Chains as protection for those cards, right, than Shield bouncing something back to hands. And so we still have the other ones. We have Gorgons, PTA, Tsunami. Maybe it's the Tsunamis or the PTAs that get mixed around. I'm not entirely sure, but just needing the 9 invokes is really important. Obviously, we need the 3 Ambrosia plus the 3 other Ambrosias. And then we also need our 3 copies of Eruption, so that doesn't leave us with a whole lot, especially when we need to be playing something like Earthquake. So the other problem is that there's just not a whole lot of wiggle room with the runes. We could look into the Elestrals, like you could cut the 2 Rummagems, but then you're losing out on so much consistency. So the current philosophy is Shield gets outed by a lot of things. It's also expensive and doesn't really help you develop the board, right? Some of these other ones are better for answering threats on table, so I think Shield just goes for now, and it's replaced with Chains because Chains protects your combo and also protects your Vesuvituga. When you're going off that hard, you really need some kind of insurance to get something like Gorgons or Poisoned Nectar if you're playing post-sideboard and they bring in Poisoned Nectar. So that's a thought process, but that's how the deck works. So you're going to play some good value mid stuff when you're not going for the combo, but then when you're going for the combo, you're going to play Drataya and then draw like 10 cards. And then the hope from that point on is that you have a board state where you can play into the Vesuvituga, play a bunch of Eruptions, and then recur the Eruptions even further and just win the game from there. So I think the biggest thing is whether or not you want to include Rise from the Ashes to really push that combo turn even harder in your favor. That the jury's still out on that. This is a very early list. I have not had the chance to play it yet, so I'll play it and maybe come back to this. But this is something, for those of you who like more combo focused decks, this is something to give a shot because it definitely feels like a combo deck when you're drawing a bunch of cards in one turn and having this really explosive pop off. But until next time, thank you for watching.